Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you believe the victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your passion and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's side. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be whiter than snow? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Sin stains the lost in its life-giving flow. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. And you serve is for Jesus your King. There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily in praises to sing? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. 169. Let my life be alive. 169. Let me live. Let me live, blessed. I can't get you right. A flat. Yeah. So I play a little bit.
I don't have time to.
Let me live, blessed Lord, in the light of thy word. Let my life be a light on a hill, leading souls now astray to the straight narrow way. Help me do some good deed while I live. Let my life be a light shining out through the night. May I lift struggling ones to the floor, spreading cheer everywhere to the sad and the lone. Let my life be a light to some soul. I was singing in Craig.
No, I'm not saying. It's in the goodness of the words.
A flat. A flat.
Is that it? wrote this song.
Okay, we'll move to the next song.
That was short.
Yeah, sure is.
Short, sweet.
Page 333. I'll fly away. What is his name? 333.
It's written down. 3. No.
Some black morning, rain like the shore, fly away to a home on God's western shore, fly away. I will fly away, when I die, I will fly away. When the shadows comes fly away. Like a bird from rainbows that fall, I fly away. I fly away. When I die, I will find mine. I fly away. Just a few more days and then I'll fly away to a land where just never ends. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, I will fly away. I'll fly away. When I die, I will fly away. Praise His name. Amen. 57. 57.
Oh, you said 87.
57.
Amazing. 57.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we in there 3,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know which days to sing. And Lord, then when we first lift your hands and praise Him. Amen. Praise God, 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 praise God. Sing the first verse one more time. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amen.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. What a great day that was. Amen. Back when I was 9 years old and the Lord called me out of the depths of sin, even at 9 years old, and here I am today. I didn't always serve the Lord, but He brought me back to where I need to be. It's time to take up our tithes and our offerings. Let's give unto the Lord as He's blessed you. I think I need it. I think I'm about to do it. It is. Lord, we thank you for this wonderful time, Lord, that we can all participate in as we give in our tithes and our offerings, Lord. We thank you for your blessings. You've blessed us with the provisions you've given us, Lord. God, we want to honor you, Lord, with what we have, Lord. And we ask you, Lord, to bless it, Lord, to anoint it, Lord. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
You're gonna pray for me. You're gonna try to sing this song. I'll meet you in the morning. I've never sung that in church. You know, it's special, but it just been on my mind for a while to sing this song. I might get it all timed up. Y'all get me. Pray for me. Page 14, you'll let me sing it. Good. And read back in. In the F chord. I will meet you in the morning by the bright river's side. In the F.
And I'll sorrow.
In the F. In the F.
Oh, okay. And what?
F chord.
Then it,
will meet you in the morning by the bright riverside. When I'm sorrow and drifted away, I'll be standing at the portal when the gates open wide. With the clothes of my long dreary day, I'll meet in the morning with a and I sit down by the river and we rapture all the pain that's within you. You know, in the morning, I'll just smile my way. When I meet you in the morning, in that city, Nashville, Foursquare, I will meet you in the morning, in the sweet by and by. And this chain is no cross for the ground. There will all be the one and the mighty will die in the land where the sun goes down. I'll be in the morning with a and we sit down by the river and the rapture all the pain with you. You know, in the morning, by the time that I wear, when I meet you in the morning, in that city that's built for sale, I will meet you in the morning at the end of the way on the streets of the city of gold, where we all can be together and be happy already. The years of the ages I'll meet you in the morning when and I sit down by the river, the rapture, all the pain that's within you. You know, in the morning, by the smile that I wear, when I meet you in the morning, in that city that's built for square.
Thank you.
Good morning. It's exciting to think about going to heaven. I'm eagerly awaiting that day. Are you ready to go? If Jesus came today, are you sure you would go with him? If the rapture came today, would you meet him in the air? If not, then you would be left behind. And to be left behind, you would experience terrible events. We're going to talk a little bit about that today and in the coming weeks. Today, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 13. So locate, please, Revelation chapter 13. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, because you are holy. We thank you because you are attentive to us. Not that we are anything special, but Lord, you are love. And you've given yourself to us, inviting us into your family. You are holy and worthy to be praised. Help us that we will be conformed into your image. That your word will transform us and that we will become holy in your sight. In Jesus' name, amen. Revelation chapter 13. We're also going to look at Daniel chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 24. So let's begin reading with Revelation 13, verse 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and a great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Notice by following this beast, they're following the dragon. Because the beast got his authority from the dragon. The dragon is Satan. This beast is a representation, it's a physical representation of the dragon. This beast is both a human and a nation. It's a joining together of other nations. We're going to look at Daniel to see that. Daniel chapter 7. As you know, during the first part of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar is king. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and Daniel explains his dream. Then in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has a dream. Let's begin reading with verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and beheld the 4 winds of heaven, were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and his eagle wings. I watched till the wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs and its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and beheld a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible. Now, if these other beasts, these first 3 weren't bad enough, Daniel sees one that's even worse than those 3. It's dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So these beasts are hideous, aren't they? If we continue reading, and I ask you to do that, continue to read this chapter, you will find the interpretation of these beasts. These beasts are kingdoms. They're both kings and kingdoms. The man in ruling of the kingdom, each individual kingdom is represented, and the kingdom itself, the nation, and the man are not separated. So to speak of the man, you speak of the nation. To speak of the nation, you speak of the man. So these are 4 different kings that will rise up. According to Daniel's time period, during the experience that Daniel was in the process of writing, these kingdoms did not yet exist. Daniel was writing about the future. In our past, 3 of these kingdoms have already passed. There is one still to come. But Daniel, according to his perspective, he was writing about his future. So when we look back at this, we see that Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and beheld the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. In other words, there was wars going on. As we see Jesus talk about, there will be wars and rumors of wars. So through the process of wars, one kingdom will overtake another. Through the process of wars, through the process of greed and political actions, there will be kingdoms rise up, kingdoms fall, and kingdoms come together and get stronger. So Daniel sees this process of wars and giving in wars. And 4 great beasts come up from the sea, each different from the other. And Daniel, seeing these beasts come up from the sea in prophecy literature is usually talking about Gentile peoples. So Daniel is seeing beasts come up among the Gentile peoples of the world, meaning that they're not Jewish peoples. He's not seeing them come out of Israel, but he's seeing them come out of other nations. And these 4 beasts rise up, as these kings rise up in the power, they become world rulers. Last week we talked about Nebuchadnezzar's vision. Nebuchadnezzar had a vision, a dream which terrified him, and he saw the different nations rising up. He saw that his Babylon kingdom was the head, one head of gold. And they descended down as each kingdom arose after him. Each kingdom, the metal became less precious and less valuable, till it wound up with the Roman kingdom. Now Daniel sees these 4 beasts coming up after that of Nebuchadnezzar. He sees that the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. The lion speaks of how it devours other kingdoms. This lion is fierce. This lion would be a beast. In that region of the world, a lion was known to be a prey animal. It's an animal which will overtake other animals quickly. A lion is an animal that other animals had a hard time defeating. If a lion wanted to attack, it would normally win the battle. So a lion would attack and devour other animals and take what he wants. A lion is the bully of the animal kingdom. The lion has eagle wings, so that speaks of how swift it acts. I watched till its wings were plucked off. So the lion is losing some of its power. It's losing some of its swiftness. And the lion morphs into a human. It stands like a man, and it has a man's heart given to him. So this is showing that this man is acting by the desire of humans. He is not seeking after the desire of God, but he is seeking for what is good for humanity, at least what he thinks is good for humanity. He's being led by the heart of a man. He's not being led by the heart of God. He is being led by the heart which is deceptive. He is being led by the heart that is fallible. So he is seeking after the ways of man. He is making decisions based on man's wisdom. He's making decisions based on the desires of that is corruptible. If we follow after our own hearts, we follow after our own desires, then we will lead ourselves into destruction. This beast is leading himself and leading his nation after that of destruction. Verse 5, and suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. Now this beast is going to overtake the first one, the first beast. The first one that we looked at, which is the lion, Daniel is seeing the Babylonian Empire, which is what Nebuchadnezzar saw last week, which was the head of gold. Daniel is seeing it like a lion. The Babylonian Empire existed from 605 to 539 BC. Then Daniel sees this bear, which is a representation of the Medes and the Persians. It's two different nations coming together, the Medes and the Persian. And Daniel says that one was higher than the other. One side of the bear was higher than the other. The Medos were higher than the Persians at first, but then the Persians rose up. These two worked together, but still one was higher than the other. And we see this happening. If we look back in history, the Encyclopedia Britannica will tell you, for example, that the Medo-Persians ruled the world in 509 through 331 BC. Then Daniel sees this leopard coming up. The leopard is speaking of how quickly this nation would overrule. When we look back at the Greece Empire, we see there was a man by the name of Alexander the Great. Now Alexander, in his teen years and in his 20s, he was able to sweep across the world. He took his army and conquered nation after nation after nation. He ruled what he thought was the entire world at the time. Every part of the world that he was aware of, he gained control of it. The leopard, the reason Daniel sees him as a leopard is because of how swiftly he's able to swoop in and take over other nations. Greece ruled the world in 331 to 168 BC. And then Greece had four major nations under them. There were others, but four major ones which gave them their strength. And I'm not sure how to pronounce them, but there are four that gave them their main strength. Then Rome steps in. Rome is this beast that Daniel sees, the fourth beast, which is not like the other beast. It is stronger. It is more terrible and more fierce. It is stronger than these other beasts. Rome comes in 168 to 476 AD. Rome comes in and overtakes the Grecian Empire. But notice that this beast, Rome, still has an element left of the Grecian Empire. For it doesn't completely wipe out the Grecian Empire. Even our Bible in the New Testament is written in Greek. The original Bible was written in Greek, the New Testament part of the Bible. Because the Roman didn't completely wipe out the Grecian Empire. They overtook them, enslaved them, and incorporated them in Roman philosophy. The Romans accepted the Greece philosophy. We are influenced heavily by the Greece philosophy. We are heavily influenced even by Rome now. Did you know that Rome has never been overtaken? Nobody was able to attack Rome and win. The Roman nation still exists, even though it has fallen down. Even though the Roman nation is weak, even though that Roman Empire doesn't exist in the same way it did back then. In 476 AD, the Roman Empire kind of just fizzled out because of the conflicts within. But the Roman nation has never been completely killed. We see this as Daniel talks about, and as we read in Revelation, that there is one, this fourth one will look like he had suffered a mortal wound. The Roman Empire looks like it's dead, but it's not really dead. We have the Roman calendar. The calendar that we base on the days of the week on is based on the Roman calendar. Our time, how we tell time from sun up till sun up the next day, it's based on the Roman idea. There's a lot of things in our society and all over the world which is based on the Roman influence. This Roman government has never died completely. There are governments that have risen in the past, and we don't have any record of them. The archaeologists are able to find cities and countries, but they are not able to identify them because the records of those countries have been completely abolished. But the Roman Empire has never been overtaken. It still exists. And this is important because Daniel sees this one. And John sees this one. This beast, this fourth beast, which will rise up again. Just as Daniel sees this fourth beast, there's the interpretation of the beast, these three beasts, and then the fourth beast. This fourth beast he sees with a little horn. Look down at verse 20. And the 10 horns were on its head, and the other horn which came up before, which 3 fell, namely that horn which has eyes and a mouth which speaks pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. So this little horn is going to make war against the saints of God, against the people of God, until the Ancient of Days come, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So this little beast, this is speaking of the one that we call the Antichrist. Now in the book of John, we see, not the Gospel of John, little John, 1 John, he calls this creature, this beast, he calls him the Antichrist. In Revelation, we see him called the beast. Daniel calls him both a beast and a little horn. This man, this beast, he is the embodiment of all that is evil. All of these others, the demons which were in charge of these people during the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and even the first Rome as it rose up. All of the demons which gave the power to the humans and all the demons which were inside of those, they will rise up again in this one that we call the Antichrist. He will be empowered by the dragon. He will have everything he does will be led and empowered by the very imps of hell. All of his strength will be demonic. He will be able to do great miracles, and people will believe that he is a god. Some people will even believe he is the God because he will proclaim to be God. And this one, this little beast, this little horn, he is going to do away with 3 of the world leaders by uprooting them. Now this isn't done by just killing them. He uproots them. He takes away their very roots. There's no stump left. He removes their roots from them so they don't have any way possible of ever coming back. He usurps his authority and he erases them basically from existence and takes his place. And among those other rulers, which is over in Europe, he's going to rise up and this horn will grow and get larger and larger. This is telling us that this Antichrist is going to be a Gentile. As this Gentile rises up, and I know some people say the Antichrist has to be a Jew, therefore the Jews will believe he is their Messiah. But this Antichrist, Daniel says he is rising up from this collection of nations. Therefore he must be a Gentile. And John sees that he rises up from this beast that was in the past and is living again. This beast, which is the new Roman Empire, is going to rise up in the power again. So these other nations, which gave power to the Roman government. They're going to come together again. And as they come together again, there's going to be one that is extremely evil, going to rise up through the ranks. He's going to begin small and rise up through the ranks. And when he gets to the top, he's going to set out a war against the saints of God. Now that would be not the Christians as we know it, because the Christian church by this time will be in heaven. But it will be those who have accepted Christ after the rapture. Those who accept Christ after the rapture, they will receive war from this beast. As he is a world leader, he'll have the entire world against them. The entire world will be attacking all the believers in Jesus Christ. He will hate them, as we see back in Revelation chapter 12. This dragon hates the woman and her child, and he set out to fight war against all of her descendants. Those who are descendant of that child of the woman, those are people who believe in Jesus Christ. Everyone who puts their faith in Jesus Christ after the rapture, they will be enemies of this beast. But if you don't put your faith in Jesus after the rapture, then you will be in alignment with the beast. You will be in alignment with the Antichrist. You will be in alignment with those who worship the dragon, who is Satan, the very enemy of God. So we see this. Now, what must we do in response? What we ought to do in response is get our life right and warn others about this terrible time that is to come. Let's look at Matthew chapter 24. The temple, to the Jews, the temple was a place of worship. The temple was a place where they would go and offer sacrifices. It was a place where their sins would be forgiven. It was a place where their sins would receive atonement. It was where they would go and pray. They would actually go physically to the temple. It'd be like going to church to pray. Instead of praying at home or praying in the store, praying driving down the road, you would physically come to church to pray. You ever pray outside of church? Well, that's good. You should. But before the cross, most of the Jews would have to go to the temple to pray. They would be there physically on the temple property to pray. The temple was destroyed. Now, the first temple Solomon built, David, if you remember, King David, he collected all of the money and all of the materials to build the temple, but God wouldn't let him build it because he's a man of war. Solomon, David's son, when he rose into power, he built the temple, and it was beautiful, it was magnificent, but the temple was destroyed because God's people refused to remain faithful. So God punished them and allowed the temple to be destroyed. Then the temple was rebuilt again. Then we see that this temple, during the lifetime of Jesus, the temple was added to by Herod. Herod reconstructed the temple. The temple was had some modifications done. And here in verse 1, the disciples are pointing out to Jesus how beautiful the temple is. To understand, a lot of the homes and buildings back then were shacks. They were just one room, like a 12 by 12 of stones that you find out in the yard, and you put mud on them and stack them together, and a whole entire family would live in a house that's just a 12 by 12 room made out of stone, and it had brush, old limbs or grass for the roof. And that was the average house. A lot of the buildings were like that. A lot of places didn't even have a roof on it. It was just a wall dividing from the neighbor. So when they look at this temple, which was beautiful, and they were continuing to add to the temple at this time as construction was happening, the temple got a lot of attention because it was growing larger and larger than everything around it. And it was white. It was made out of white, naturally white stones. Let's begin reading in verse 1. Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to him the building of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. They're currently in the process of building the temple, making it larger, and Jesus is already talking about the destruction of the temple. So the disciples are confused. They don't understand what he's talking about. How can it be that these stones, one will not be left on top of another when it's not even, the destruction is still happening? They were confused. They didn't understand what Jesus is saying. But Jesus is basically saying that day is coming very soon when this temple isn't going to be needed any longer. Because you don't have to come to this physical location for prayer and for worship, because one day you will worship God through me. You will pray in the name of Jesus Christ. You don't have to go up there to the temple. You don't have to come to the temple and offer sacrifice anymore. But I am going to make the sacrifice for you. Jesus tells them over and over again that I will die and I will rise up. I will lay my life down and I will get up in 3 days. Jesus is telling them these sacrifices aren't necessary any longer, because I am the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus is promising them that this temple is not going to be needed anymore, because I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. You don't have to come and pray in the temple, but rather you get in me and I will get in you, and you will talk to God in my name. Oh, hallelujah. So to pray in the name of Jesus is to be in Him and to rely on Him to communicate with the Father. It's not about a building. It's about His name, His holiness, and His righteousness. So let's look at verse 3. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? That's one question. When will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming, of the end of the age? There's two different questions they're asking him. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. We're frequently being warned in the New Testament about false teachers. Even in the Old Testament, there's warnings about false prophets. In the New Testament, we're warned over and over again to be careful not to be deceived. Do you know how to make sure that you're not deceived? You get this Word of God and put it in your heart. Put this Word of God in your mind every day. You ought to be reading this Word and meditating on this Word every day. Everything that happens, compare to this Word. Every time you hear a sermon, compare it to this Word to make sure that preacher is not leading you astray. Even if it's me. Matter of fact, especially if it's me. Then compare it to this Word. I ask you, I challenge you, I invite you to take every sermon you hear me preach and line it up against God's Word to see if it matches God's Word, to see if I'm telling you the truth. I don't want you to be deceived. Jesus does not want you to be deceived. So take this Word and put it in your mind, put it in your heart, and compare every sermon against this Word to make sure that you are not led astray from Him. Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. We can look back through history and see people rise up time and time again claiming to be the Messiah. Today, more than any time in history, there are people alive on the planet right now who are claiming to be the promised one of God. Those people are liars, because there's only one, and that is Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God. There's only one Son of God, and that is Jesus Christ, who gave His life on the cross and rose from the dead. Verse 6, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. You know, there are people today, I received a phone call earlier this week. Somebody telling me, hey, have you seen what the latest news? And they told me some event that happened on the news. And they told me that last week there was this collection of stars up in the sky, which was supposed to be a sign for us to realize that we're in a certain part of Revelation. And this person on the phone call will say to the pastor, you need to watch this news clip. I'm going to text a link to you. You need to watch this news clip because it proves we're in Revelation chapter 11 right now and all this kind of stuff because of these events that happen in history. That type of thing is not biblically accurate. We don't need to look at the news and try to say, well, look at that news, then this verse and this verse over here and this verse over here. Well, that's proof that all this stuff is happening in the news. That's not what we ought to do. What we ought to be doing is getting God's Word inside of us, and so that we can live according to His Word, and then let the Word show us what is God's will. If we try to look at the news first and force it into the Bible, then we will become deceived. The theological term of that is called eisegesis. It means that you're trying to interpret the Bible without the leadership of Jesus. What we ought to be doing is looking at the Word within context of the original author's intent, hearing from the original author the way he intended us to understand it, then allow it to lead us closer to God's heart. Does that make sense? The Word of God within context is what we need. So look at verse 6. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. So when we hear about chaos all around us, as one nation is trying to overtake another nation, we hear about shootings out on the street, we look at the front cover of the newspaper, and it tells us that a man has committed a double homicide in Hart County. We see stuff like that. That's wars and rumors of wars. But that is not a sign of the end times. Jesus says, don't allow this to trouble you. That does not mean we're living in the last days. When things are getting bad, yes, recognize they're bad, and people need salvation, but that doesn't mean we're in the middle of the tribulation period. Even though time will get more bad than you've ever seen before, don't believe we're in the middle of the tribulation. Don't allow anybody to deceive you. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. There's going to be catastrophe all over the place. And these things must happen. Verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Now that's speaking of birth pains like a woman going into labor. Now, I cannot pretend that I understand the pain of a woman in labor. But Jesus is using that type of analogy. The pain that a woman goes into labor. Creation will be suffering that type of chaos, that type of birth pain. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because of lawlessness will abound. Does that mean that they're going to defund the police? There's going to be lawlessness? I've heard it interpreted that way. Some people say that as they're screaming out now to defund the police, that that's lawlessness. No, that's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about the law of God. When there's an absence of God's law. When people disregard the teachings of the Bible. When people don't live according to the law of God, that is lawlessness. Actually, in the Greek, this word lawlessness means it's one rejects God's law and establishes himself as the authority. So he's worshiping himself as a God instead of humbling himself to the God of all creation. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. So the love of many will grow cold because people worship themselves instead of worshiping God. Because people reject God's word and think their own thinking is the way to go instead of lining themselves up according to God's law. That will cause you to have a lack of love for other people. You know, the sign of a true Christian is sharing love. The sign of a true Christian, even the world will recognize that we are belonging to Jesus by the love that we have for one another. Amen. The love that is among the brethren and the the brothers and sisters. The love that we have for each other, that will prove to the world that Jesus is in us. But if we live the way the world tells us to, then we will live lawlessly, and our love for other people will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. The end will come, the end of the church age, the end of this time period. As we're going to see later in future weeks, Daniel speaks about there being 7 weeks that take place. 6 weeks have already passed. There is 1 week yet to come. Right now, we are between Daniel's 6th and 7th week. Let me clear that up for a moment. We're going to talk about it later, and I'll show you by the Word how to understand that in future weeks. But basically, throughout history, there's been 6,000 years, as Daniel sees in his prophetic warning. Then there's a time period, which is a great mystery, according to the prophets of the Old Testament, which is the birth of Jesus. Even the disciples had a hard time understanding, as Jesus is taking his kingdom, that he is going to the cross. Luke tells us, I think it's Luke, tells us that their minds were blocked. They couldn't understand what he meant by the death and the resurrection. It was only after the resurrection to where their minds opened, where they could understand that he died for them and rose, and now we have life in him in his resurrection. Paul explains in Romans chapter 6 that we die to our sin, we die in Christ, we die joining together, united with Christ, we are buried with Christ, and we rise up into life with Christ. That was a mystery. And Paul is the minister, the apostle called to explain the mysteries of God. He explains the mysteries of the Old Testament. Those mysteries of the Old Testament is Jesus Christ explained why he came as the promised one of God, lived a sinless life, and died and rose for our salvation. That was for us. That's a great mystery that many of the Jews during that time could not understand. So here we see that this gospel, the gospel about Jesus, will go all around the world and be a witness to all nations. Then the end will come. The end will come as the end of this respite, this interlude between the 2 weeks, this time period. The time of the Gentiles will be fulfilled. When the end of the Gentiles come, then that's the rapture. That's the catching away of the saints, as we see Paul talk about in Thessalonians. The catching away of the church, and we will join with him and be with him forever. At that moment, that begins the tribulation period. Jesus says in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, something abominable is going to happen. There's a great sin that takes place, and it will devastate many. That's what he is saying. This abomination of desolation is something that is abominable against God, will take place, and it will devastate many people. This abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant in those days, who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may be in the winter or on the Sabbath. For when there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world till this time, no, nor ever shall be. In other words, this is the worst time in human history. We can just get out the Encyclopedia Britannica, Google the Encyclopedia Britannica and look at any event in history. Look at the world wars in history. Look at just the little part where Stalin was trying to take over the world. Read any clip of information when Hitler was trying to take over the world and see how bad it was. Watch the movie Schindler's List. See how badly Jews were treated. And that is nothing compared to what is in the future. That is nothing compared. Jesus says it's the worst time this planet will ever see. That which is yet to come is worse than anything in our past. Why? As Daniel tells us, along with John, that these world rulers are going to come together in one person. All of the evil powers that gave authority to all these world leaders in the past, they're going to come together and cumulate in one person, this great beast, and he's going to make war against God's people. We call this guy the Antichrist. But we don't need to be looking for the Antichrist. We're not called to look for the Antichrist. We are called to look towards Christ. If we look towards Him, we keep our eyes on Him, then when He comes, we'll go with Him. If we keep our eyes on Him, He has promised that we will forever be with Him. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank You. Thank You, God, because You are our Lord. You have given Your word to us, promising us of salvation, promising us that we get to be with You forever. Your word guides us and shines to us, showing us what we ought to do, showing us the way. Thank You for Your word. Help us that we can be changed, that we can be transformed into being who You want us to be, so that we can carry Your gospel to all of the world before it's too late. Help us, Lord, that we can tell others about Your saving grace. Amen. Is there anyone who desires prayer?